First thing I remember about being poor is that it didn't feel like poverty. It felt like noise, the constant clatter of machines from the factory down the road, mixing with the rain on our tin roof until I couldn't tell one sound from the other. My name is Teo Marin, and I grew up in Las Brisas, a neighborhood pressed against the edge of a city that never seemed to look our way. The streets were dirt that turned to mud when it rained, and the houses were built from whatever people could find. Ours had one room. My mother, my father, my little sister Pilar, and me, all under one roof made of corrugated metal that turned the rain into a drum. My father worked at a bottling plant on the other side of the city. He left before the sun came up and came home after it went down, smelling like rubber and grease, his hands stiff from the machines. My mother stayed home with Pilar, who was 3, and somehow managed to make food stretch further than it should have been able to. I want to be clear about something. We were poor, but I never felt like my life was missing something. I had a family. I had a roof even if it leaked. And I had school. School was the one place that felt like it was mine. I sat in the front row every single day. Not because anyone told me to, but because I didn't want to miss anything. I liked the smell of chalk. I liked the sound of pages turning. And more than anything, I liked the small wooden toolbox Mr. Ibarra, our shop teacher, kept locked in a cabinet at the back of the room. One morning, Mr. Ibarra walked in carrying something wrapped in a cloth. He set it on his desk and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was an old radio, its case cracked, wires hanging loose from the back. "Today," he said, "we're going to learn how things work, not just how to use them, how to fix them." A boy near the back muttered something about it being a waste of time. Another girl put her head down on her desk like she'd already decided to sleep through it. I sat up straighter. "Can it be fixed?" I asked, mostly to myself. Mr. Ibarra heard me anyway. "Almost anything can be fixed, Teo, if you understand what's broken. That's a skill. People will always need someone who can fix things. It can earn you a living wherever you go." A living. I had never thought about earning money from anything other than carrying boxes or sweeping floors. The word sat in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending out ripples I could feel for the rest of the day. That afternoon, walking home, I kept thinking about the inside of that radio, the wires, the tiny pieces that all had to connect in just the right way. At dinner, I asked my mother the question that had been building in me all day. "Mama, do you think I could learn to fix things? Like radios, machines?" She wiped her hands on her apron and looked at me for a moment before answering. "Your uncle used to fix bicycles before he moved away. He always said his hands knew things his head didn't. Do you think I could learn it?" I asked. "Really learn it?" She reached over and put her hand on the side of my face. "I know you can. You're smart, Teo. And you don't give up easy." That night, lying on my mat next to Pilar, listening to my father's breathing as he slept off another exhausting day, I made a promise to myself. I didn't say it out loud. I just felt it settle into place, like a stone fitting into a wall. I would learn how things worked. I didn't know how long it would take. I didn't know what it would cost me. I just knew I wasn't going to let it go. The next day, I asked Mr. Ibarra if I could stay after class to look at the broken radio. He looked surprised, like he hadn't expected anyone to ask, but he smiled and let me sit with it for an hour, showing me which wires connected where. I found an old notebook in the trash outside our house. Most of the pages were gone, but a few were left, and to me they were as good as new. I copied down everything Mr. Ibarra showed me, drawing little diagrams of wires and switches so I wouldn't forget. Battery, switch, wire, beaker. I practiced what I could without any real tools. Taking apart an old flashlight, a broken clock my mother had been about to throw away, anything with screws I could turn with a butter knife. About a week after that first lesson, I was walking home a different way than usual, past a row of shops I didn't normally pass. And that's when I saw it. In the window of a small pawn shop, sitting on a shelf between a guitar with no strings and a stack of pots, was a toolbox. Real tools, a small screwdriver set, pliers, a soldering iron with a frayed cord. The metal box itself was dented, but it had a handle and a latch that still worked. I stood there for a long time. A price tag was taped to the corner of the box. 70 pesos. 30 pesos was more money than I had ever held in my life. All at once, in my own hands. I looked at that toolbox the way some kids looked at toys in other windows. I didn't move for a long time. Then I heard my mother calling my name from down the street, and I turned and ran to catch up. But I kept glancing back over my shoulder until the pawn shop disappeared around the corner. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. 70 pesos. I had nothing, not one coin of my own. But lying there in the dark, staring at the metal roof above me, I started thinking about something I'd seen people doing near the river. Something that, until that moment, had never seemed like it had anything to do with me. The next morning, before school, I walked down to the riverbank. I had passed this stretch of the river 100 times without really looking at it. Trash collected along the edges where the water slowed down. Plastic bottles and aluminum cans tangled in the weeds, pushed there by current and wind and people who didn't think twice about where their garbage ended up. I found an old feed sack behind our house, the kind my father used to carry tools in, and I started picking through the weeds. It was disgusting work. Some of the bottles still had liquid in them, gone warm and sour. My hands smelled by the time I was done. But by the time I had to leave for school, I had 11 bottles and 4 cans in my sack. I asked around and found out a man named Senor Vidal ran a small recycling stand 2 streets over. He weighed what I brought him on an old metal scale and counted out a handful of coins. It wasn't much, less than 2 pesos for that first morning's work. But it was something. Every day after school, instead of going straight home, I walked. I walked along the river. I walked through the lot behind the market where people dumped things. I walked past the bus station, where tourists sometimes left bottles on benches. Some kids from school saw me doing it. One afternoon, a boy named Hector pointed at me from across the street and laughed. "Look at the trash picker," he called out. I didn't answer him. I just kept walking, my sack getting heavier with every block. That evening, my father came home and saw the sack sitting by the door, smelling faintly of the riverbank. He picked it up, looked inside, and looked at me. "What's this for?" he asked. "I'm saving up," I said, "for some tools. There's a toolbox at the pawn shop." He didn't laugh the way I half expected him to. He just nodded slowly, set the sack back down and said, "Keep going." Then, took 16 days. 16 days of walking after school instead of resting. 16 days of Senor Vidal's scale clicking and his coins clinking into my palm. 16 days of Hector and a few other kids calling me names I tried very hard not to hear. On the 17th day, I counted my coins on the floor of our house, lining them up in rows so I could be sure. 70 pesos exactly. I ran the whole way to the pawn shop. I was out of breath when I got there, and the old man behind the counter, Mr. Farrow, looked up at me with raised eyebrows as I dumped a handful of coins onto the counter. "That's for the toolbox," I said, pointing. "The dented one." He counted the coins slowly, twice, the way old people sometimes do things, like they have all the time in the world even when you don't. Then he reached into the window, pulled out the toolbox, and set it on the counter. It was heavier than I expected. The latch stuck a little, but when I got it open, the tools inside were clean and oiled, like someone had taken care of them once. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you so much." Mr. Farrow just nodded and went back to whatever he'd been doing before I burst in. That night, I sat under our one working lamp after Pilar had fallen asleep, and I opened the box and laid every tool out on a cloth, one by one, the way Mr. Ibarra had shown me with the radio. Screwdriver, pliers, soldering iron, wire cutters. I made it part of my routine. Every night, after helping my mother with the dishes and putting Pilar to bed, I sat with that box and practiced on whatever broken thing I could find. I fixed Pilar's wind-up toy when its gear slipped, and she laughed so hard when it started spinning again that I felt like I'd done something enormous. When I turned 12, I got a job sweeping floors and stacking shelves at a hardware store owned by a man named Mr. Aguilar. He was strict but fair. "Do good work," he told me on my first day, "and I'll pay you every Friday, no excuses." I saved almost everything I earned. I bought small spare parts when I could find them, switches, wire, tiny screws, and kept them sorted in old jars along the wall of our house. One afternoon, while I was sweeping near the front of the store, a man came in carrying a portable fan that had stopped working. He set it on the counter, frustrated, saying he needed it for his shop and couldn't afford a repairman. Mr. Aguilar shrugged. "We don't fix things here, just sell parts." I set down the broom. "Can I look at it?" I asked. The man hesitated, then nodded. I opened the back of the fan, found a loose wire exactly where I expected one might be, and reconnected it with the soldering iron from my toolbox, which I'd started carrying with me. The fan whirred to life. The man's face lit up with relief. "How much do I owe you?" "It's over there," I started to say, meaning to point him toward Mr. Aguilar. But the man pressed a few coins into my hand before I could finish, and when I turned around, Mr. Aguilar was staring at me like I'd just done something impossible. "You fixed that? Just now?" he asked. "I've been practicing," I said. He nodded slowly. "Keep it up." After that, word started getting around the neighborhood. People began bringing me things to fix: radios, fans, the occasional clock, leaving them with Mr. Aguilar during the day so I could look at them after my shift. I felt proud every time someone said my name and "the kid who fixes things" in the same sentence, even though the toolbox itself was starting to look as worn as the things I repaired. But when I started high school that fall, everything got harder. The building was bigger, the teachers stricter, and a lot of the other students didn't care about any of it. Some of them noticed the things about me that Hector had already pointed out back home. My shoes, my old uniform, the dented toolbox I sometimes carried in a cloth bag. "Hey, repair boy," one of them said one morning, loud enough for half the hallway to hear. "Why don't you go fix yourself some new shoes? Maybe solder them together." A few people laughed. I felt my face get hot. I didn't say anything back. I just kept walking to class, my cloth bag held tight against my side, the names from the hallway following me all the way to my seat. I sat alone behind the school that afternoon, the cloth bag still resting against my side, and I thought about just leaving the toolbox at home for good. Maybe Hector and the others were right. Maybe I was making a fool of myself. I opened the bag anyway. Inside, the soldering iron had a small scratch on its handle from the day I fixed the fan. I remembered the riverbank. I remembered Senor Vidal's scale. I remembered my father nodding and saying, "Keep going." Then, I closed the bag, put it back over my shoulder, and went to class. A few weeks later, I heard about a free workshop at the community center on the other side of Las Brisas. It ran 2 nights a week, teaching basic electronics and small appliance repair, taught by a volunteer engineer named Ms. Reeve, who had come from England to work at a nearby plant for a year. My mother wasn't sure about it at first. "It's at night," she said. "The streets aren't always safe after dark." "I'll be careful," I said. "Please, this matters to me." My father thought about it for a long moment, then nodded. "Straight home after," he said. "No stopping anywhere." So twice a week, I walked quickly through the dark streets to the community center, my cloth bag tucked under my arm. The classroom was small: 10 plastic chairs, a long table covered in spare parts, and a single bright light hanging from the ceiling. On my first night, I sat near the back, too nervous to say much. The girl next to me had short curly hair and a toolbox even more battered than mine. The latch held shut with a piece of wire. She glanced over at my bag and smiled a little. "Soldering iron?" she asked, nodding at the shape through the cloth. "I had to share mine with my brother for 2 years. "I'm Teo," I said. "Renata," she said. "I live 2 streets over from the market. I think I've seen you around." I didn't tell her it was probably near the riverbank with a sack of bottles. Ms. Reeve started the class by writing her name on the board and asking us to introduce ourselves and say one thing we'd already fixed on our own. When it was my turn, my voice came out quieter than I wanted, but I told them about the fan, and a few people looked impressed. Good, Ms. Reeve said. Very good, Teo. After that first class, Renata and I started walking partway home together, since our streets crossed near the market. We began practicing on the steps outside the center after class, taking apart small radios together under the streetlight before her older brother came to walk her the rest of the way. She was sharper than me with circuits. She could trace a wiring diagram faster than I could finish reading it. I was better with my hands, all those years of practice paying off. Without really deciding to, we started filling in each other's gaps. One evening, Ms. Reeve kept me back after class. I've been watching how hard you work, she said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small multimeter, the casing worn soft from use. I want you to have this. Thank you, I said. Thank you so much. I practiced with that multimeter and Renata over the following months, sitting on the steps, testing circuits out loud while the streetlight buzzed above us. Then I got sick. It started with a fever that wouldn't break, and within a day I couldn't get out of bed. A whole week passed in a haze of heat and chills, my mother pressing cool cloths to my forehead, my father's worried face appearing in the doorway each evening when he got home. What if I fall behind? I asked my mother one afternoon, my voice rough. You need to rest, she said gently. Your health matters more than any repair. Still, I kept the multimeter under my pillow. When the fever finally broke, I tested a few circuits even though my eyes felt heavy and my hands were weak. Renata came by twice that week with a broken radio from the workshop, sitting cross-legged on the floor by my mat, quizzing me on what might be wrong with it even while I was still half sick. You're not getting out of this, she said, holding up the radio. What's the first thing you'd check? The fuse, I said weakly. Close enough, she said, even though I'd gotten it exactly right, and we both laughed. Later that year, Ms. Reeve told us about a regional repair and technology fair happening in the city center. Students from different schools, working engineers, booths where you could show what you'd built or fixed in front of strangers. I've never done anything like that, I told her. You'll be fine, she said. Both of you will. On the day of the fair, Renata and I rode the bus together, both of us quiet with nerves, carrying a small radio we'd rebuilt together from spare parts. The building was huge, full of tables covered in gadgets and machines I'd never seen before. We found a booth with a small crowd around it. I stepped up before I could talk myself out of it. Hi, my name is Teo, I said, my voice shaking only a little. I'm from a neighborhood called Las Brisas. This radio was broken when we found it. We fixed it ourselves. I turned it on, and music crackled out of the speaker. People clapped. A man near the front came over afterward and told me the world needed people like me. Renata went next, showing the second device we'd built that day, talking about her brother and the parts they'd shared and the dream of one day working somewhere her skills would actually matter. Months later, Ms. Reeve called both of us aside after class, holding a folded piece of paper that I could tell, just from the way she held it, was important. There's a scholarship, she said. A full year at a technical institute in the city. Electronics and repair training. Everything paid for. My chest tightened. How many spots? I asked. Normally just one, she said. Then she smiled. But this year they've expanded the program. Both of your applications were chosen. I looked at Renata. She looked back at me, and for a moment neither of us said anything at all. The letter came 2 weeks later, with both our names printed on it in the same careful type. My mother read it twice before she started crying. My father hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, and over his shoulder I saw Pilar, now 6, holding a piece of paper folded into the rough shape of a heart. Don't forget us, she had written on it, in letters she was still learning to make straight. I won't, I told her, and I meant it. The morning we left, Renata and I sat together on the same bus, 2 seats. Both of our families crowded onto the sidewalk waving until the bus turned the corner and they disappeared from view. The city was louder and bigger than I had ever imagined, full of buildings that seemed to lean over the streets and crowds of people who all seemed to know exactly where they were going. The dorm was a long building with thin walls, and most of the other students had grown up with tools far better than the ones in my cloth bag. On the first night, during introductions, my voice shook just like it had at the fair. "Hello, my name is Teo," I said. "I'm from a small neighborhood. I'm here to learn and grow." People clapped anyway, the same way they had at the fair, and across the room Renata gave me a small nod that meant "I see you, you did it." The classes were hard. The instructors moved fast, and the lab work piled up faster than I could finish it some nights. But Renata and I studied together every evening, sitting on the floor of the dorm hallway with circuit boards spread out between us, testing each other the way we always had. Some nights, the city felt too big and too far from home. I missed my mother's cooking, my father's quiet nod of approval, Pilar's laugh. On those nights, Renata and I would sit in the hallway long after we'd finished studying, just talking about home, about the river, about Senor Vital's scale and the dented toolbox in the pawnshop window. "You really collected bottles for 16 days? She asked one night, like she still couldn't quite believe it. 16, I said. "I counted every one." She shook her head, smiling. "That's the most stubborn thing I've ever heard." "It worked," I said. "It did," she agreed. Partway through the year, a call came for me from home. My father was in the hospital. His back, which had been bothering him for years, had finally given out, and the doctor said he needed rest and couldn't work for a while. I sat with my notebook that night, the same kind of notebook I'd been writing in since I was a kid, and I wrote down everything I was feeling. Whether I should go home, whether finishing the program even mattered if my family needed me. Renata sat with me while I made the call. My father's voice was tired but steady. "No, son," he said, before I could even finish asking. "Stay. Finish what you started. Make us proud." I stayed. I finished the program. So did Renata. After the program, we both got hired at a small electronics repair shop in the city, fixing appliances for customers who couldn't afford to just buy new ones. Within a few years, the shop's owner retired, and Renata and I, with savings we'd both put aside since we were kids, bought the business together. We expanded it, training local workers from neighborhoods like Las Brisas, the same way Mr. Ibarra and Ms. Reeve had once trained us. On weekends, Renata and I went back to the community center where we'd met. We started a free repair workshop of our own, using tools we bought new so the kids there wouldn't have to do what I did. One evening, after the last student had gone home, Renata was packing up when she pulled something out of her bag. The old toolbox. My toolbox. The metal dented and scratched, the latch held together with the same piece of wire from years ago. "You left this here last week," she said, holding it out to me. I took it, running my thumb over the worn metal. "Some things are worth keeping," she said. "Yeah," I said, looking at her instead of the box. "They are." We turned off the lights and locked up together, walking out into the warm evening air. The same streets I used to walk with a sack of bottles over my shoulder, except now Renata's hand was in mine, and neither of us was in a hurry to get anywhere else.